Hi, everyone. This is Dylan Teggart. I'm here for the latest edition of 360 Insights HR Tech Chat. Today, I have two special guests. I have Christine Nichlos, the founder and CEO of People Science, and Jessica Oberto, the Director of Process Engineering at People Science. For those of you who don't know, People Science is a talent acquisition and recruitment process sourcing company based in New Jersey, not too far from me, who I'm in New York. And they recently unveiled HireGate, a technology that completes the recruitment cycle. Hi, Christine. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Dylan.
Hi, Dylan. Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. And for people that don't know anything about People Science, could you give them a brief overview of the company and just tell them a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So I founded the company in 1997. And the premise then for us really was to help companies figure out how to acquire talent. So our foundation is in the advisory side, and we've got a good legacy there. Shortly after we started the practice, after I opened the company, we were asked by one of our clients, Lucent Technologies actually, to not only give them a schematic on how they could acquire 360 switch technicians at the time. These are guys that climb poles. So, and the reason I'm telling you that is almost an impossible feat, right? So we gave them a schematic, then they quickly came back and said, look, can you put a team together to execute that? And that's what, fast forward to 2005, the term RPO was coined. So we are a advisory service and a recruitment process outsourcing company. We also offer staff aug, particularly recruitment contractors, as a segue into longer term partnerships. And as a result of that, we have had to have our own technology to augment applicant tracking systems to capture all the data. So about, I'm going to say 5 or 6 years ago, 3 of our largest clients said, hey, you're doing 5,000 of our hires. We're doing 15,000 total. Why do you have reporting? We don't. And they were interested in our technology and asked us to bring it to market. So that's how I wound up in the tech business. But I think what you'll see, we do a webinar once a month, Reimagining Talent and Talent Acquisition Evolved is the name that's moving to now. So much of the data that we've accumulated and that we're able to manage our RPO partnerships with and our advisory services come from HireGate. And I think today, of all times, the world that we're living in recruiting is finally, in my opinion, coming of age, right? And you can't come of age and you can't really accomplish a well-oiled talent machine or prepare for the future and hire and retain the right people unless you have the data. And the technology platforms that are out there now, ATSs are great, but they pick up at the ATS when the applicant applies. Today, recruiting is much more sophisticated. It starts well before the applicant applies. So being able to capture all the data, where are you going? What are the results of your advertising? What kind of sourcing are you doing? Who's doing the sourcing? A lot of information that really boils down to tiny metrics. So, long-winded answer, but 4 sectors. So advisory, RPO, our technology, and staff aug.
And it sounds like, it sounds like, HireGate and People Science were kind of created to meet these like kind of holes in the market. As of right now, as of 2024, obviously a lot has kind of changed in the last couple since the pandemic. What are some of the trends that you both are seeing in the market? And are there any trends that people aren't really talking about that you feel they should? And where do you fit into all of that?
Yeah, so I think that the C-suite for many years, when you look at results from the conference board and all different kinds of surveys, have had, it's always in top 3, top 5 talent. What kind of talent are we going to get? I think the pandemic urged an awakening that wasn't there before. So, for example, we were recently at a conference and there were 2 different discussions, CEOs on the stage with their CHRO or CPOs, chief people officers, and the CEOs are actually saying, wait a minute, we pushed you to hire like crazy. These are both tech companies, by the way, pushed in the tech sector to make all these hires. Then we wound up laying all these people off. And the whole time the CHROs are saying, no, that's not what we need to do. But without metrics, it's really hard to build that case. So I think that this day and age that we're in, where we're starting to say, wait a minute, recruiting is not just find me more people, work harder, work faster. It's just not a solution. And the irony is there, you would never build any organization. Let's say you're going to start to manufacture microchips. You would never say, let's just build them faster and harder and budget them when things go up and take their budget away and lay them off when they go down. You would come in with a well thought out, executed plan based on metrics and your objectives. That's not what's happened in talent acquisition until recently. We're seeing some big strides and we're seeing some interest. We're seeing concerns about budgets. I'm not going to say that we're seeing budgets increase because we're not seeing the money put on the pavement yet, not to the degree that we'd like to see it be. And we're still seeing this. Things are slowing down. Let me let go of my recruiters. I don't think we're going to see a solve for that in this upcoming year, maybe 3 years, 5 years. Just maybe you have a voice on that too. But I think we're starting to see the importance of having a talent acquisition strategy and having it executed well.
Yeah, I agree with
your
that.
transition.
Yeah, for me, what I've seen since the pandemic is that I think, we've been hearing so much about AI and what its effect on recruiting will be. And with that, I think the expectation for talent acquisition and recruiters particularly is to really elevate themselves. And I think the way to do that is to show talent acquisition not so much as a cost center as what it's been seen, but really as a strategic business partner. So how do you do that, right? I think first, talent acquisition and recruiters in the seat need to be able to understand the business. And then with that, aligning your talent acquisition leads and your recruiters with the business's goals. And finally, having talent acquisition be able to speak the language with data-driven decision-making, which is essentially metrics, right? So being able to communicate with the business on that level of what they understand, really showing the importance of metrics there. That's what I've seen so far.
And I think when it comes to AI, when it comes to technology, in every sector, I would imagine, but we live and breathe in TA. So what I will say is there's kind of this misnomer, AI is going to change everything. It's going to read my mind and solve my issue. Because ChatGPT kind of threw everybody for a curve, right? Wait, we can do this. We were on the phone with one of the top 3 ATSs the other day that we're going to a partnership agreement with them. One of the things that they were saying is that their CTO made the statement that we fully endorse. AI is technology. That's what it is. It's advanced technology, but it is technology. And I think that this thought that AI is going to change everything as compared to me to look at what I need, and I need to learn, besides what my needs are, what is the technology I don't know about that can change the game for me? And most of the newer technologies coming out have AI embedded in them. So we're seeing enhancements, but I think this kind of deer in the headlights that happened when when people started to fully grasp what AI's capabilities are, it's not something to fear, right? It is technology, and making smart decisions around that means you really have to know your current state. Right? You have to know where you are and what your objectives are and understand talent acquisition. I think one of the biggest downfalls that we've seen, and Jess, you might have some opinions on this too, there are a ton. I mean, the HR technology field is easily a $24 billion industry, and it's targeted at continued growth. That's astronomical. Some of the funds that are going into these technologies, and I can say this with confidence because every 2 weeks on a Tuesday, I sit with our head of IT and we go through the new technologies that are out there. As an RPO, we pilot them, and we have found technologies that save millions of dollars. But for the time and the effort that we've put in, I bet we've probably investigated at least $1 million worth of tech that does not work or isn't ready yet. Yet we see prospective clients and clients signing on to these, I'll call them point systems, right? So if your ATS is managing, or your HRIS is managing, that's your base platform. And now here's an assessment that looks really cool that works for maybe one section of your organization. We call those point systems. So there's a lot of point systems coming out. And I think being careful and understanding what your roadmap is, what your objectives are first, what your roadmap is, and then investigating what's out there is a better trajectory than saying, well, that looks good. Let's use it. Let's buy it.
Yeah, I think that's well said, because I think a lot of people invest and see kind of the shiny object that AI is, and are like, oh, it's gonna change my company. I'm gonna be rich because of it somehow. Like it's as if it's gonna be like, it's co-CEO in a way. It seems that's the way some people seem to talk about it. But I think, like you're saying, people need to be a bit more realistic and ask themselves, okay, what value is this really gonna bring? It's kind of like hiring a new person or like a new team. You kind of need to place the value in it and place it on your roadmap and make sure it all makes sense, because it is just going to do whatever you tell it to do ultimately. It's not it learns from us. And with that being said, I feel like in terms of recruitment, because it does learn, AI does learn from the people it's recruiting from. There have been some talks that it does result in, sometimes it can result in a bit of a homogenous workforce being selected, because the AI is just picking what we like over and over again, and maybe not noticing the gaps that humans would notice in your workforce. Has that been something that you've come across? And if that is a real issue, how can it be dealt with, and where does kind of the human technology line start to blur, and where should there be some sort of harmony between the two?
Well, it definitely starts where you said. In fact, we did, I think in November, we did a presentation in tandem with HR.com about the ecosystem and AI in the ecosystem. And, the first thing that came up was exactly what you're talking about, like, how do I understand what it is it does? And there was actually, I think I pulled some things from ABC, American Broadcasting, about how AI only picks up what's on the internet, really, right? So they ran a bias test, and you can see this on one of our webinars, and we showed the example of, if you asked AI, I'll give you the fast food side, show me a fast food worker, it showed you people of nationalities that would definitely be stereotypical, and it said, now show me a CEO, and it showed an older white man. AI is going to reflect what you tell it. And as far as the ML side, the machine learning side, it's going to do what you do. The challenge with TA, let's just take AI out of the equation. Let's take technology out of the equation, because the larger issue with talent acquisition is that you don't understand that there's factors you can control. I think when we go, what is the root, right? What is the systemic thing evolving from? Like, why is it that talent acquisition is kind of this, just find them and we can't do it? It's because people are involved, and it's very difficult when you make one bad hire to live with that hire, right? And everybody thinks they can interview. So in a business perspective, right, from a process side, you would never not have a really, focused intention there. So when you have a really, really good strategy, then you're able to say, this is what we need, and then you collect that data. What we're not doing is collecting enough data in talent acquisition. And everything that we're getting is after the fact. We're getting it after the applicant applies, after they go through the interview process, and after they're hired. But so much happens in the planning phase, and these days in the sourcing phase. I mean, 10 years ago, I would say the same company that had maybe 80% of their candidates and their hires were coming from incoming are inverted. That 20% are coming from incoming and 80% are coming from who they have to source and reach out to and engage. It's a whole different talent world. The candidates' expectations are different. And if you don't have your finger on that pulse, you're already behind. So jumping into a technology or expecting it to solve what data without the data that it needs, that's your biggest issue.
And speaking of kind of putting your finger on the pulse of, what the candidate wants, when you're looking at the market and the hiring market, what are some of the key metrics you're looking at to figure that out? Or because every person is
beyond everything. We're actually doing a webinar about this next week, but Jess is laughing because it's where she lives. Jess heads up the advisory, but yeah. You want to talk about EVP for us, Jess?
Sure. So, EVP, your employee value proposition. Being able to pull metrics, I recently did a presentation on this, especially when you're looking at quality metrics. So, the types of people you're hiring into these positions, what's their turnover rate? How are they performing? Does this job meet their expectations? And a good way to measure that is going back to the EVP. And it's so important to have your employee value proposition agreed upon and in place before recruitment even starts, because this is the standing point for your recruiter to engage candidates, to introduce them to your company if they haven't heard of you before. And a good EVP is aligned with recruiting, with the hiring managers when they're interviewing your candidates, when they come in and do their training and onboarding, and then when they're actually in the seat working. So was everything they were told before their start date or 6 months into their position actually what it is when they're in the seat? And you can measure that through your retention rates and your employee satisfaction rates. So like Christine mentioned, EVP is so important in attracting, retaining, and engaging your talent. So it's a good heavy metric to go by.
If you go back to like the turn of the century, when I'm going to say white collar workers really started. So we're coming out of the Industrial Revolution. GE was a big hirer, right? So if we look at that model, what they did is they said, what kind of talent are we looking for, and who do we want to attract, and how do we want to do that? And then, they actually understood, and you understood when they said GE, what that organization was, right? Not that we're trying to replicate that. But as we move forward with technology, what's happened, it's been like, okay, this person's applying, let me take a look and see where I am. So technology has kind of forced us into this reactive mode and propagated that even further, right? Today, as organizations sit back and they look at the landscape, you need to know who you are as an employer. And that's where your EVP comes from. If you think of it in this context, I don't know if you've ever dated, or whatever the case is, you need to know who you are before you're engaged with someone, right? And I think the companies that are winning at this, they understand their employee value proposition because they understand who they are. The challenges that we do see with that is that oftentimes, especially in larger organizations, the C-suite will say, well, we're an up-and-coming tech company. True story. And they weren't. They are a legacy organization that's moving into the tech field. So they spent like 6 years around this value statement, hiring people from the Valley and from all over the place. And the turnover was crazy because they weren't able to move this large organization into a tech company overnight, right? So that's an example of where an EVP fails. But if you know who you are, if you know what your company's values are and what you bring to the table, no matter what they are, right? I think there's this rush to, we've got to become cooler. We've got to be hipper. We've got to meet Gen Z. We've got to make sure we're doing this. And you're not that. And you try to hire to that, it's going to boomerang. It's a bad situation. So the idea is to really do the due diligence up front and know who you are. Build your EVP for the organization. How's that disseminate into the departments, all the way down to the job function? Make sense?
Yeah. And in terms of, if you going back to just like hard data on that, because there is a cultural aspect, of course, which is kind of, you can't really, put numbers to it all the time. But I know you've talked a bit about, tangible business metrics and kind of, the metrics that kind of move the needle for a business. Do you happen to have, you gave the example of the tech company, but do you happen to have real world examples that deal with blue collar and white collar jobs as well?
Absolutely. And what I'm talking about is kind of agnostic, right? It stretches across all industries, and we do both high volume and higher level, lower skilled positions. So I think we have a lot of data. We have a lot of data. But when it comes to measuring things like the EVP, I think, again, people call it soft skills. You think it's not measurable. Yeah, it is. You can tell by the results from your advertising. And when you're sourcing, whether it be candidates that are applying, your referral candidate base, are you looking at your internal base, and are you looking at sourcing? So your hire is going to come from one of those avenues, right? They're either going to come from candidates that you source, those that have applied, a referral, or an internal that you're going to move. So while your recruiters are engaged with them, they can ask them specific questions around the EVP, and they can see kind of we call it A/B testing. is this the message you're getting, or is this the message you're getting? What are you hearing and what are you not hearing? And then you can trace that using various methods. I know we've used the Lou Adler method with one particular client, to go back and trace that to production and say, is this EVP true to what we need? And is this an issue that we need to challenge ourselves internally? We don't understand our EVP, or do we want to change our EVP based on newer generations and their values? But the first point is making definitive decisions, then A/B testing it and measuring those results. It's a lot simpler than you think. Recruiters are collecting this data, right? So if I'm a recruiter and I'm trying to recruit Jess, I can ask her these questions. I probably am. The challenge is, where's this data going? Am I recording it on a spreadsheet? Am I recording it in a notebook? Am I, or is it in my mind? So if I can just record this data and then run a report on it, now I'm working with facts as compared to emotions. We have a saying at People Science and HireGate, and that is, emotions lie, numbers don't. It's very difficult to be a recruiter. If you've reached out to, think of it this way, you've reached out to 5 people and they all said no. Are you feeling good at that point? No, it's kind of like, it's very easy to go to, nobody wants this job, we're a crappy company, there's not enough people out, all these things happen. But if the recruiter in fact knows, I have to talk to 20 people to engage 1, they're not disappointed at 5. Right. So having this kind of data is so powerful. Not only you're learning your market, you're able to empower your recruiters instead of getting annoyed because they didn't fill the job, understanding what's going on in the market. We have a case study that we can send you to called, Is It Me, My Market, or My Recruiters?
Yeah, I feel like that could be, it's a common issue, I'm sure. And I guess one thing with all this data one is collecting, and I've I had a talk with someone in IT who's doing IT at a company, and he was running into the issue of, okay, we have this massive mountain of data that we're collecting, but no one knows really what to do with it, and it's kind of just piling up. So how like, while I completely agree that it's good to collect all the data you can, do you tend to recommend that someone has a dedicated person or a dedicated person and software, let's say, to disseminate the good from the bad? Because I feel like you kind of need to know what to do with it in the first place, and maybe not everyone has those skills right away. What would you kind of advise to someone who's in that position, who has been collecting this data but doesn't really quite know what to do with it, or what's good, what's bad?
I don't think there's good or bad data. I think there's data. The same data that may not be useful to you may be useful to somebody else. So I think categorizing it, and this is where AI can come in. And there's some very sophisticated, I know, if you're a large organization or you have a lot of data, I would look at some of the products that are out there. I know Savvy is one of the ones that we've looked at that have worked with the fintech and the insurance industries, because if you look at what they've done with AI, I think they're way ahead of the game. And no coincidence, they're ahead of the game because of the amount of data that they have, right? Insurance companies and banking organizations have a huge amount of data, whether it's categorized or organized well. But you see a lot of startups started even 15 years ago with basic algorithms that switched to AI early on. So understanding the data means knowing what data you're collecting, and then looking at that data. And then there are so many good tools that can be used. If you don't have that ability internally, maybe you need a product that already can collect that data and it's embedded for you. Am I answering the question for you? Are you saying, what technologies relieve that? Or
Yeah, I think you are, for sure. And I like the way you said, like, there's no good or bad data. It's just useful or not useful. And I think that makes sense. I guess for some people, it's in my other conversations with other interviews like this, is just some people don't know what to do with it, and they're kind of just at like almost like a fork in the road of like, screw it, I can't do this anymore, it's just too much to handle, or they need a solution.
I do think finding someone that is process driven and has a mind like that to manage your data is important. And really, just if it's overwhelming and you don't know what to do, just audit what you have and get that, like Christine said, have a clear line of sight of the data that you have. and then go back and benchmark those metrics and data against industry standards. So you know what realistic goals are, you know where you should be. And then having a team that is interested in this, research and adopt new technologies that can pull this data for you. But then as you're growing this data program out within your organization, have an iterative approach to really optimize the recruiting metrics. So set a regular calendar of when reporting will go out, review it and adjust it as needed. But most importantly with the data is the communication. So between talent acquisition, recruiters, hiring managers, and any other stakeholders in hiring, get feedbacks from what they need, what is important to them, what are their questions, just to make sure that the data and reporting you're giving out is useful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And one final kind of broad question before we start to wrap things up is, I've heard you talk a bit about it, about how having positions sit empty can be, obviously very detrimental to a company. And this kind of leads into like what to do with all this data is that, sometimes you do have this position sitting empty, you don't know why it's sitting empty, you're not finding the right people, like maybe everyone who's applying is good, but not quite right. And there's a cost to that ultimately. And there's a cost to kind of not doing anything or not changing your strategy or not even realizing that there's a problem. So how does that get resolved? And what would you recommend people to kind of do that introspection to maybe, solve this problem that maybe they don't realize they're having? And how does that kind of tie into your concept of completing the recruitment cycle to kind of finally make that, last dash into finally onboarding someone and finishing that off?
Well, the first thing that I do want to mention is that I don't know anybody who's collecting tons and tons of data. So I'm interested, and we should talk about that. But on the flip side of that, the first place to start with some of the points that's just making, okay, so how do I get started with that? Cost of vacancy, which is so worth your attention. So think of cost of vacancy as a profit and loss statement for a position. So if everybody has limited resources. Yeah, we all need more budget, but which positions should be worked on, which should become a priority? Because that becomes a really big entanglement internally, right? And what typically happens is the HM that yells the loudest or is liked the most gets the most attention, right? But the truth out, if you step back and you say, what is the cost of this position every day that it's open to the organization? That changes the way everybody looks at it. And it allows TA to take the lead and say, this is why these are our first 5 priorities. And this is why maybe we should outsource this position. I've seen the cost of vacancy is so powerful that I've seen entire departments outsourced. I've seen product lines dismissed. It really makes a big difference. So you need to be careful with it. But it also is a very strategic way that talent acquisition can align with finance and with the CEOs to get it to the top of the funnel. And then, based on that information, you can start to do the good work that Jess was talking about. You know where to start.
Well, thank you both so much. It's been a really insightful discussion. Before we completely wrap up, do you mind just telling the people out there what you're up to and where they can find you?
Sure. people-science.com. What we're up to now is really, we've actually inherited quite a few RPOs and interest in us for RPOs, I think because organizations are understanding that they need more than what they currently have. We are not for everybody in the respect that we do find the root challenges and fix them. So we truly are an organization in the RPO sense and in the advisory services where we're fixing the wheels on the bus as we're driving it. So as we're filling positions, we're constantly looking for those root causes. Like, what is it today for this one position? And what is that going to mean for this position in the next 4 to 5 years? So positioning our clients so that they are really becoming proactive as compared to reactive when it comes to talent acquisition. Probably, I think the biggest offering that we can bring to the talent community is HireGate. It was a big decision to bring it to market. It is our secret sauce, but the results that you'll get when you collect this data and the way you'll be able to manage, uplift your own recruiters, build your own cases, all these really sore spots that have really held talent acquisition back from advancing the way it needs to. This data and this tool is going to help you get there. So I encourage you, hire-gate.com, HireGate.com, and you can get to us through to HireGate through the People Science website as well.
We're also on LinkedIn as People Science and HireGate. Definitely encourage listeners to follow us there. You can see our current webinar invites and announcements and any other thought leadership that we share.
And do you offer any sort of test or consultation for your software at the moment?
Absolutely.
We like to do a pilot with everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And
but we also, I'm sorry, Jessica.
I was just saying, anyone can go to our website and contact us on either hire-gate.com or peoplescience.com, and you can contact us and we can do a 30-minute consult to speak to you.
Nice. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap it up. Thank you both for joining me today, and everyone please check out People Science and HireGate. Again, everyone, thank you for listening, and I've been speaking to Christine and Jessica from People Science. Take care.
Thank you, Dylan. Thank you for your work.